Holocaust Memorial Day, which is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is today, is a day that we will come together on to remember the Holocaust, the people that were murdered, and subsequent genocides as well. And people all over the country, in schools, in workplaces, wherever they are, will come together to remember. And this is hugely important for us as a society.
And Janine, you have a very personal experience of that time. You clearly would have been very young, but what do you recall of the time?
Well, I wasn't that young. I was 9. So at that age, you remember details, you remember a lot. And I think I was a little bit curious, I think, a sort of nosy child maybe, because I kept asking my mother, like, for instance, when the Germans arrived in our town and they started rounding up men, and I couldn't understand what was going on. So I kept asking my mother, why has he got to escape? And that's when I realized, she said, because we are Jewish. And I realized that they're persecuting the Jews. And so I remember a lot when we were thrown out of our flat and my parents dug a hole under the wardrobe to hide if we knew, when we heard the Germans coming, my mother, my brother, 2 years younger, he was 7, we were hiding in that hole. My father, my grandmother hid in the loft, and they were found. We were not found this time. So when we came out of the hole, my mother told me, I asked about my father, and very soon my mother said they shot my father and killed my grandmother. And then we hid in kennels. I remember seeing the Gestapo approaching, and I remember the black boots, shiny boots. And for years I used to have this nightmare about the boots trying to get me. Then we were told we had to move to the ghetto. My mother became ill because the conditions in the ghetto, which is well documented, were so bad. The poverty, the killing of people, hanging people, and always this idea of finding places to hide in case there was going to be a raid. My mother was ill with typhus, and when I went to see her, she was lying there. I don't know if she was already dead, dying. That's an image which I cannot forget. And then hiding with a Polish Catholic family who betrayed us and who killed my brother. They buried him alive, and somehow the German soldier didn't want to kill me. I went back to the ghetto, and then hiding in stables. My auntie and my uncle dug a hole under the stables floor, and we were hidden by a Polish young man, Catholic man. There were 14 Jews hiding in that hole. The conditions were awful. After a year of hiding in that hole, I managed to get papers, and then I traveled from convent to convent. I went back to Krakow, where there was a convent with children, and I've never telling anybody that I was Jewish. And eventually I landed with a family working as a maid at 11 and a half.
That's a very young age to have all of that pressure on your shoulders. And I just wonder now how on earth you've been able to carry on a relatively normal life, having experienced such tragedy.
I had help with a psychotherapist for a few years. Otherwise I wouldn't have been able to, although my late husband, my children, my 2 sons, they felt that it was important for me to tell my story, and they supported me. And I started about 12 years ago. For 50 years I was unable to speak about it. I wanted to forget, and I was frightened. But one cannot forget. It's impossible. I remember, I can still see where we were, how my mother was when she was dying. I can still see all this. I can see myself as a small girl. And somehow, sometimes I think, Was it me or was it another little girl?
And Sami, stories like this, this is incredible in itself and so heartbreaking, and yet it's one of millions, isn't it? And just tell us why is it important for survivors like Janine to retell their stories in this way?
I think because the Holocaust is about stories, it's about people and families and individuals. And the truth is, we can teach this from a textbook, and it's important that we do. But really, you only understand the history of the Holocaust when you understand stories like Janine's. And that is what reaches young people, and that's what makes them feel empowered to stand up when they see anti-Semitism today. So really, we can't overstate the importance, and that's why we organise for survivors like Janine to speak in schools all year round.
Where can children themselves go to find out more information about this if they want to explore it further?
Yes, well, they can go to the Holocaust Educational Trust website, and we, organise 4 schools to have survivors in. So that's het.org.uk. But there's a wealth of resources and information that we can put people in touch with so that they can gain understanding into this most complex of subjects.
And Janine, what message would you have for children of today?
The message not to forget. It's important because it will help us to understand what happened and why, and to be tolerant. I really feel it's so important not to be frightened of minorities, not to persecute them, to accept that people are different and one has to have respect for them.